The Honourable Nanaya Mahuta.
I ngā iwi o te hiku o te ika, tēnei e tāpiri atu aku mihi ki era I wharekihia I mui tā kautaaroro I tēnei wā. Kua tai ki tēnei wāhanga ki te whakamārama, e tihi o ngā tinihanga e pāna ki a koutou te tukitanga, aha kua he iti, tēnā pia, he wāhanga anō, hei whai oranga e tihi o koutou nei hiahia, I mui I te aroro o te kōmiti whakahaere, e tika ana me mihi atu ki te minita, tēnā tātou katoa. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to follow my colleagues and support the comments that they have made in relation to this particular settlement bill. I was on the select committee that travelled to Kaitaia and listened to the submissions. I thought I would share some insight into how we deliberated over the issues that were brought to us. This is a second reading, not a third reading. It will explain some of the reasons why the changes that have been made were made, but give a context to the limited extent with which the Māori Affairs Select Committee can in fact change settlement legislation, and we're quite acute and aware of that around the Select Committee table. We're also aware, as we go out into the rohe to listen to the treaty settlement claims, interests of within iwi, of hapu and of whānau, that there are a number of things that it would be wrong for us to try and address. We cannot address internal whānau disputes that have often arisen as a result of this type of process. We're not there to arbitrate on whakapapa, and we have a limited ability to make extensive changes to a negotiated outcome between the Minister and the respective iwi. And I think once we get that out on the table, when we go around through the submission process, I've found that the response may not be altogether tolerant of the role of the Māori Affairs Select Committee, but they are understanding in terms of how we could add value. And this is one way that we have been able to achieve the intent of what's in the legislation to what's reflected in the deed. And my colleague Adrian Rurafi actually highlighted it quite subtly, but he did a very good job at identifying that our role is to ensure what's intended in the deed is reflected in the legislation. And if we feel through either the submission process or the information coming back from advisors that that's not sufficiently clear, we will ask questions, we will seek to ensure that what is in the legislation that protects the interests of those iwi who have got their settlement is actually what's been expressed. With that said, the submissions that came to the Select Committee were, on the whole, very supportive. And nobody from any other iwi is going to make comment on how challenging this task is and how difficult this road is to walk. I listened with significant, with a sense of not knowing the full circumstances of the relationships and whakapapa to the interests of Te Uhutai, for example. And in fact, when we pursued some of their concerns around the Kohu police station, we did ask questions of the officials. Would it be easier to put this this particular property out of the settlement and wait, or leave it in the settlement? We asked Te Rarawa, have you consulted sufficiently enough where Te Uhutai assured that their interests will not be prejudicially affected? We gained information that gave us a level of confidence to say the manner with which the Minister has negotiated and proposed a way forward around kohu, the amendment that we were able to achieve around the definition of historic claims does give I guess, that level of protection, but also there was a letter of confirmation from Te Rarawa around the prospective interests of Te Uhutai that might be addressed in another claim. Now, these are quite complex issues, and we're kind of skimming through it in the second reading process, but it does underpin the level of detail with which the Minister, his negotiators, the advisors and the respective iwi have to try and work these types of things through. I also want to make a point around the Ngāti Kahu submission. We got a very strong submission to say that those interests in themselves should be left separate to this particular claim for a number of reasons. And when we again distilled through what was actually being preserved in part, let me check, 19, I think, if I'm right, of the bill. Sorry, where am I? Of the bill, yes, in relation to the Y1695 claim, we felt that the bill is actually part 14 of the bill. We felt that the way in which the interests in the accumulated rentals have been preserved were the right way to go. And in fact, it doesn't prejudicially affect the comprehensive interests of Ngāti Kahu. Now, I suspect that some of us may be criticised for continuing down this process, but again, on judgment and on balance, this we felt that there had been sufficient consultation to be able to preserve those types of interests. We made minor amendments to the bill with relation to the change of names and things like that with regards to the Heritage New Zealand Pohere Taonga Act. They didn't change the substance of the intent of the bill. Now, where I want to focus my contribution in the second reading is actually on the mechanisms to make this particular settlement work in its entirety. There are a number of interlocking bits of legislation that would have regard to what's being achieved in each of these settlements. The Resource Management Act, the Local Government Act, the Conservation Act, the Fisheries Act, the Land Transport Act, the Heritage Act that I referred to earlier, the Reserves Act, just to name a few. Now, it's absolutely critical for those iwi under the Te Hiku claim settlement that those interlocking bits of legislation are able to help achieve what's intended in their respective pieces of their respective acts. The reason why I comment on this is when the proof is always in the pudding. And we're debating the legislation but not its application. And when we have the third reading and then we will go away and celebrate what they have achieved, they're left with having to work with government departments, local government, officials in ways that doesn't give them the direct access at a ministerial level to ensure that the intent and the integrity of the agreements are being delivered in these other areas. I think, Minister, one of the innovations that you've been able to achieve in your time in this particular portfolio is the post-settlement unit within OTS. I'm sure, and certainly from when I've heard you speak about the reviewing of how the legislation is being implemented and things like that, it's in this space that the integrity of what's been agreed to in legislation can be monitored, and I welcome the ongoing role of that. So as not to be too trite, I have to say past events in the last couple of weeks have made me look at the rights of first refusal clauses a little, with a lot more diligence. Minister, this is no reflection on you personally. You have been absolutely robust in your effort to continue with treaty settlements. But can I foreshadow, in the committee stages, it will be of some interest, I think, to pursue the intent of what's written with some of the realities of its application. And I'll just give one example. In Hamilton East, Housing New Zealand on-sold a particular house that was under rights of first refusal back to Tainui. There has been a court action around that particular process. This is not a reflection on any one government. This is a reflection on a process that, although it was protected in legislation, became a subject of court action. And that is because, I think, at that particular time, people just weren't aware that they had other obligations under other bits of legislation. So I'm foreshadowing in the committee stages, if it's not going to be too onerous for you, Minister, some questions on right of first refusal may just come up. Nō reira, kia koutou katoa, tēnā tātou.
I call the Honourable Pisita